Hollywood has always been built on image. From the first silent pictures to the golden glow of Technicolor, stars were packaged, polished, and sold as larger-than-life figures who embodied beauty, glamour, and power. Audiences worshipped them on screen, but what truly kept Hollywood alive wasn't just the movies. It was the whispers. Behind the silver screen lived another kind of story, one that never made it into the scripts but traveled quickly through dressing rooms, backlots, and smoky Hollywood bars. These were the stories that couldn't be printed in fan magazines but lingered in the shadows, a different kind of legend that actors carried with them whether they wanted to or not. Among the most tantalizing of these stories were the ones that had nothing to do with acting ability or even scandal in the usual sense, but with something more intimate, more physical. It was the kind of gossip so charged that it could define a man's reputation as much as his biggest box office hit. Some actors became famous not just for their talent, but for what was rumored to be hidden beneath their costumes. Their reputations grew bigger than their movies, a mythology that grew stronger with every whisper retelling, every backstage joke, every sly mention in a memoir. Hollywood in those days was a place of secrets. Studios controlled everything. The marriages, the friendships, the scandals. Publicists could bury a damaging story with a phone call, and actors often lived double lives, smiling for cameras while hiding the truth behind carefully built facades. But there were some things the studios couldn't control, and once a certain kind of rumor took hold, it spread faster than any publicity machine could keep up with. That's where the legends of well-endowed actors began, part Hollywood gossip, part locker room humor, part weapon of myth-making. It's worth remembering that these stories weren't just about sex. They were about power, dominance, and how masculinity was defined in an era when the movie star was supposed to be the ultimate symbol of male perfection. For some actors, the rumors enhanced their careers, adding to their aura of danger, seduction, or mystery. For others, it was an uncomfortable shadow, a reminder that in Hollywood, you are always being sized up, sometimes literally. Even in their own time, these whispers became part of Hollywood culture. Fellow actors told jokes about on talk shows, writers slipped sly references into biographies, and in some cases, the legends became so inseparable from the men themselves that it was impossible to talk about their lives without mentioning the rumors. Decades later, the fascination hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown, because these old stories give us a window into the way Hollywood once worked, how myth and reality were constantly blurred, how stars were turned into archetypes, and how even the most private details became part of public consumption. And so, when we revisit the golden age of Hollywood, we're not just watching old films. We're revisiting an entire mythology built around these stars. Their legacies weren't only measured in Academy Awards or box office numbers, but in the whispers that followed them through studios, hotel lobbies, and private encounters retold by others. These whispers became part of their stardom, locked into Hollywood's history like an open secret. Today, we're diving into 5 old Hollywood celebrities who were famously well-endowed, and how those rumors shaped their image, their careers, and their legacies. Some leaned into the myth, some tried to outrun it, and some never addressed at all. But in every case, these stories revealed just how much Hollywood was built not only on what audiences saw on screen, but on what they heard in the shadows. Errol Flynn's story reads like the script of one of his own swashbuckling adventures, full of daring, charm, scandal, and tragedy. Born in Australia in 1909, Flynn drifted through early jobs and odd pursuits before landing in Hollywood almost by accident. He was handsome, athletic, and restless, the kind of man who looked like he had been born to wear a sword and swing from chandeliers. Warner Brothers took one look at him and knew they had found their next matinee idol. His breakout came in 1935 with Captain Blood, a pirate film that transformed him overnight from an unknown into one of Hollywood's brightest stars. By 1938, his role in the adventures of Robin Hood cemented him as a definitive swashbuckler, the man who could command an army, outwit villains, and seduce a princess, all while flashing that devilish grin. But Flynn's fame wasn't confined to the screen. Off camera, he lived as though life itself was a never-ending adventure. He sailed yachts across oceans, boxed with champions, chased thrills wherever he would find them, and above all, developed a reputation as one of Hollywood's most notorious womanizers. He was known to host wild parties, drink excessively, and move from one affair to another with reckless abandon. The press nicknamed him the Playboy Pirate, a man whose real-life escapades often rival the action of his films. The whispers about his private life grew so widespread that they eventually birthed one of Hollywood's most enduring expressions. In Like Flynn, the phrase became synonymous with easy sexual conquest, a shorthand for his legendary ability to seduce women with little more than a wink and a smile. While the phrase would later take on broader meanings in American slang, at its core, it was rooted in Flynn's reputation. He wasn't just a leading man. He was a cultural symbol of sexual freedom, a figure who seemed to embody a kind of raw, unrestrained masculinity that audiences both admired and feared. Yet Flynn's reputation also came with a darker side. In 1942, he was charged with statutory rape involving 2 underage girls, a scandal that threatened to end his career at its peak. The trial became a media circus, with lurid details splashed across newspapers and reporters eagerly feeding the public's hunger for gossip. Flynn, for his part, insisted on his innocence and maintained a devil-may-care attitude even in court, sometimes charming the jury with the same charisma that had made him a star. In the end, he was acquitted, but the scandal only added to his dangerous allure. For some, the trial tarnished him. For others, it reinforced the image of Flynn as Hollywood's ultimate bad boy. Part of what fueled these stories were the persistent rumors about his physical endowment. In a town where gossip was currency, Flynn's alleged size became a staple of whispered conversations and ribald jokes. It was said to explain his endless string of lovers, his unstoppable confidence, even the way he carried himself on screen. Whether true or exaggerated, the rumor merged with his swashbuckling image until the two were inseparable. He wasn't just Errol Flynn the actor. He was Errol Flynn the legend, a man whose virility was as central to his fame as his swordplay or his smile. But behind the bravado was a man constantly chasing the next thrill, often at the cost of his own health and stability. Flynn drank heavily, lived recklessly, and aged faster than his years. By the 1950s, his boyish good looks had given way to a bloated, weary figure, a man clearly paying the price for decades of indulgence. Still, even in decline, the myth of Errol Flynn endured. His very name evoked adventure, scandal, and sex. Looking back, Flynn wasn't just a movie star. He was an embodiment of Hollywood's obsession with larger-than-life masculinity, a figure who lived his public image as much as he performed it. The studios may have promoted his films, but it was the gossip that kept his legend alive. His rumored endowment, his countless affairs, his scandals. They all combined to create an aura that audiences couldn't look away from, even when the truth was murkier than the myth. If Errol Flynn was Hollywood's pirate king, then Marlon Brando was its untamed beast. Marlon Brando was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen before. When he arrived on the screen in the early 1950s, he didn't just act, he exploded. Trained in the Stanislavski system and steeped in method acting from the Actors Studio in New York, Brando brought an intensity that felt raw, dangerous, and shockingly real. In A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, as the brutish Stanley Kowalski, he turned what could have been a one-note role into a cultural earthquake, his every gesture radiating both menace and sensuality. By the time he starred in On the Waterfront, 1954, Brando had not only won an Academy Award, but had redefined what it meant to be a movie star. He was not polished like Cary Grant or regal like Clark Gable. He was visceral, unpredictable, and alive. Later, his iconic turn as Vito Corleone in The Godfather, 1972, would secure his place as one of the greatest actors in cinema history. But Brando's genius on screen was matched by an equally fascinating private life. Biographies and memoirs over the years have documented his magnetic pull, not only toward women but toward men as well. He was unapologetically fluid in an era when Hollywood demanded rigid heterosexual facades. Friends and lovers recalled affairs with actresses, dancers, socialites, but also with male actors, singers, and even political figures. He once famously admitted in an interview that he had experienced love and sexual encounters with men, casually brushing off what would have been scandalous for most stars of his generation. For Brando, boundaries seemed meaningless. He lived, loved, and indulged according to his own desires. The rumors of his size became part of that mythos. Lovers and contemporaries spoke, sometimes openly, sometimes through innuendo, about Brando's physical presence off-screen as well as on. His virility was a recurring theme in Hollywood gossip circles. Unlike some actors who try to distance themselves from such talk, Brando seemed almost amused by it, sometimes making jokes at his own expense, sometimes allowing others to exaggerate. His reputation as a man of formidable endowment intertwined with his reputation as a man of formidable passion. It wasn't just that he was attractive, it was that he radiated something primal, something that seemed larger than life in every sense. That rawness carried directly into his acting. On screen, Brando rarely felt performed. He sweated, shouted, mumbled, caressed, raged. His emotions seemed to pour from a place so authentic that audiences couldn't look away. Critics and fans alike often connected that same raw sensuality to his personal life. His characters were often brash, sexual, physically commanding, and in interviews, he exuded the same energy. To many, it felt as though his rumored physical gifts were just one more extension of the force that drove his performances. The man who could dominate a room without speaking a word, who could make a single line sound like confession, was the same man whispered about in bedrooms and backlots. Of course, Brando was also a magnet for scandal. His unwillingness to play by Hollywood's rules made him both admired and feared. He clashed with directors, walked away from lucrative contracts, and refused to conform to the polished image studios wanted. He gained weight, turned down roles, and made political statements at the Oscars that shocked the industry. He was, in every way, a man who could not be controlled. For some, this behavior tarnished his career. For others, it made him all the more iconic. Just as rumors of his size and affairs added to his mystique, his defiance of Hollywood's system made him seem like a rebel not just on screen, but in real life. When people look back at Brando today, they see contradictions. A man of extraordinary talent and reckless indulgence, a pioneer of modern acting who often sabotaged his own career, a sex symbol who openly acknowledged relationships outside the heterosexual mold that Hollywood tried to enforce. His story shows how myth and reality can blur until they are indistinguishable. Was Brando as wild, as passionate, as insatiable as the gossip suggests? Or was he simply a man who understood that mystery and scandal could keep him alive in the public imagination long after the lights dimmed? Whatever the truth, the legend of Marlon Brando endures. He remains one of the most celebrated actors in history, his name synonymous with both artistic revolution and personal excess. And whether in gossip or in fact, the tales of his private life, his lovers, his appetites, his rumored endowment, remain as much a part of his legacy as The Godfather or On the Waterfront. But long before Brando, Hollywood already had a king, Clark Gable. Clark Gable's name is written into the very foundation of Hollywood's golden age. Born in 1901, he didn't come from privilege or polish, but built his career through determination and natural charisma. By the 1930s, he had risen to become one of MGM's most bankable stars, embodying the rugged, masculine leading man that audiences longed for. His most enduring role came in 1939 as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, a performance that cemented him as the king of Hollywood. With his sly grin, commanding presence, and effortless charm, Gable wasn't just an actor. He was a cultural archetype, the standard against which other men were measured. His public image was carefully crafted yet authentic in its appeal. Gable projected toughness on screen, whether as a roguish adventurer, a battle-worn soldier, or a dashing romantic lead. But he also radiated warmth that made him irresistible to women and admired by men. He wasn't the polished aristocrat like Cary Grant or the dangerous rebel like Errol Flynn. He was something different, masculine but approachable, rugged yet elegant, a man who could sweep a woman off her feet while still being believable as the everyman hero. It was his balance that made him one of Hollywood's most enduring stars. But just like his contemporaries, Gable's off-screen life became a fertile ground for gossip. Lovers and industry insiders often spoke, sometimes with admiration and sometimes with envy, about his gifts. The whispers about his endowment became part of the mythology that surrounded him. Biographers and gossip columnists described his magnetism in ways that hinted at more than just charm. Unlike actors whose reputations were built purely on scandal, Gable's alleged physical attributes seemed to reinforce what audiences already saw on screen: a man of strength, virility, and dominance. His very presence suggested an abundance of masculine energy, and the rumors only magnified it. At the center of Gable's personal life was his relationship with actress Carole Lombard. Their romance was one of Hollywood's most celebrated love stories, full of passion, humor, and devotion. Lombard, known for her sharp wit and sparkling comedic talent, matched Gable's charisma in every way. Together, they were the golden couple admired by fans and adored by their peers. Yet even in the glow of their relationship, the constant rumors about Gable's exploits and legendary reputation followed him. Lombard was famously playful about gossip, often teasing her husband, but the fact that their love endured despite it only deepened the fascination. Tragedy struck in 1942 when Lombard died in a plane crash while returning from a World War II war bond tour. Gable was devastated, and those who knew him said he never fully recovered from the loss. The man who had seemed untouchable on screen was suddenly vulnerable, broken in a way that revealed a deeper humanity. Yet even in grief, his legend persisted. The stories of his virility, his romances, and his masculinity continued to swirl, merging the public and private Gable into a singular myth. What made Clark Gable unique was that he embodied Golden Age masculinity not just in rumor, but in reality. He was a prototype, tall, broad-shouldered, confident, and magnetic. He didn't need scandal to define him, but the whispers about his private life only reinforced the image he projected. Unlike some stars whose careers were damaged by gossip, Gable's legend seemed untouchable. In fact, the rumors may have only enhanced his status as Hollywood royalty. Audiences believed in him because he represented a fantasy, and the myths about his personal life made that fantasy feel all the more real. When Gable died in 1960, just after completing The Misfits with Marilyn Monroe, he left behind a legacy that stretched far beyond his films. He was remembered as the man who could say, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," and make it sound like both a dismissal and a declaration of power. He was remembered as the king, the leading man against whom others were measured. And yes, he was remembered for the whispers, the quiet stories that cast him as not only the king of Hollywood, but also as a man whose masculinity extended far beyond the silver screen. While Gable was Hollywood royalty, another man ruled television with jokes and rumors. Milton Berle's career stretched so long and wide across American entertainment that he earned multiple nicknames: Mr. Television, Uncle Milty, and, among his peers, a few less printable titles. Born in 1908, Berle was already a veteran of vaudeville and silent films as a child actor by the time most of his future colleagues were still dreaming of stardom. He performed in radio, stage, and film throughout the 1920s and 1930s, developing a reputation for fast-paced jokes and a personality that seemed impossible to contain. But it was with the dawn of television in the late 1940s that Berle truly became a household name. Hosting Texaco Star Theater from 1948 to 1953, Berle ushered in the television era almost single-handedly. His program reached Nielsen ratings of 97%, numbers so astronomical they have never been matched since. Families gathered in living rooms across America to watch him crack jokes, dress in outrageous costumes, and deliver the kind of slapstick humor that worked perfectly on the new medium. The sales of television set skyrocketed thanks to him, and soon he was crowned Mr. Television. He was the first superstar of the small screen, the man who made TV essential to American life. But Berle's fame wasn't confined to what audiences saw on screen. In Hollywood circles, he was equally famous for something else: his legendary endowment. Unlike many stars who tried to bury or dodge such rumors, Berle became the subject of constant jokes from his peers, and instead of shying away from them, he leaned in. Comedians, actors, and talk show hosts would drop hints or outright gags about Berle's size, knowing the audience was in on the joke. The legend became so widespread that it was practically impossible to separate from his identity. The most famous anecdote came from fellow comedian Phil Silvers, who once quipped that when Milton Berle unzipped, the rest of the men in the room packed up and left. Others echoed similar stories, each more exaggerated than the last, until Berle's reputation had grown into a kind of folklore. He wasn't just a comic who could bring a room to laughter. He was a man who could silence it with a single gesture. The myth became such a part of his story that Berle himself eventually played along, letting it fold into his larger-than-life persona. This openness set him apart from the likes of Errol Flynn or Clark Gable. Flynn's scandals nearly derailed his career, and Gable's whispers remained just that, whispers, carefully kept at the margins of his carefully maintained image. Berle, by contrast, treated his reputation as one more joke in his arsenal. He weaponized it, folding the rumor into his comedic identity until it became part of his brand. For audiences, it only added another layer to his appeal. Not only was he outrageous and unpredictable on stage, but the stories about him off stage made him seem larger than life in more ways than one. That combination of comedy and scandal helped Berle endure long after his television heyday ended. Though his later career shifted into guest appearances, stand-up specials, and cameos, he remained a beloved figure, the kind of entertainer who was always remembered with a smile. And part of that memory, inevitably, was tied to the endless jokes and winks about his reputation. Where others might have fought to separate their artistry from their private life, Berle made them inseparable, understanding that in show business, myth can be just as valuable as talent. By the time he passed away in 2002, Berle had spent over 8 decades in the spotlight. His legacy was secure. The man who brought television into America's homes, who helped shape modern comedy, and who left behind a trail of anecdotes that ensured his name would always provoke a grin. His story demonstrates how gossip, when embraced, can become an asset rather than a liability, turning scandal into spectacle and rumor into legacy. But if Berle was a joke, Rock Hudson was a tragedy. Rock Hudson's rise to fame was the stuff of Hollywood fairy tales. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. in 1925, he was a shy, working-class kid from Illinois who struggled with a distant father and an unsettled childhood. When he arrived in Hollywood after serving in World War II, he didn't have connections or money, just striking good looks and a quiet determination. Signed by Universal Pictures in the late 1940s, Hudson was molded into the perfect leading man of the 1950s. With his towering height, broad shoulders, and effortless charm, he became the very picture of the all-American dream. Hudson's breakout role came in Magnificent Obsession in 1954, where his blend of tenderness and masculine strength won over audiences. He quickly solidified his place in the pantheon of stars with Giant 1956, starring alongside Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. That performance earned him an Academy Award nomination and proved that he wasn't just a handsome face. He was a serious actor. Through the late 50s and into the 60s, Hudson was everywhere. On magazine covers, in blockbuster dramas, and most memorably in a string of romantic comedies with Doris Day. Those films, like Pillow Talk and Lover Come Back, made him a household name, a symbol of clean-cut masculinity, and a figure of wholesomeness that America embraced wholeheartedly. But behind the carefully crafted image of the masculine, all-American dreamboat, another story was quietly unfolding. In Hollywood circles, rumors swirled about Hudson's private life. Lovers, friends, and insiders whispered truths that could never be printed in the gossip columns of the time. Hudson was gay in an industry that demanded silence. His reputation as a ladies' man was carefully maintained by studio publicity teams, complete with orchestrated dates and photographs meant to reinforce the image. Yet the whispers never stopped. To those who knew him personally, the truth was an open secret. Tied into this web of gossip were rumors about Hudson's endowment. Just as with Errol Flynn, Marlon Brando, and Clark Gable before him, Hudson's physicality became part of his legend. Fans adored his broad-shouldered physique, and those in his private circles often suggested that his appeal went even further. Stories of his lovers, kept quiet for decades but later revealed in biographies and memoirs, hinted at a man whose reputation as Hollywood's ultimate leading man wasn't only about acting ability or good looks. The whispers magnified his myth, reinforcing the idea that Rock Hudson embodied an almost exaggerated ideal of masculinity, both on and off the screen. Yet the very qualities that made Hudson a star, his beauty, his charm, his reputation as the perfect man, trapped him in silence. Hollywood in the mid-20th century was brutally unforgiving to gay actors. Being outed could mean the end of a career, the destruction of a public image carefully built through years of studio investment. For Hudson, that meant living a double life, adored by millions of women who saw him as the dream husband, while privately navigating relationships in the shadows. His fame was inseparable from his secret, and his silence became both a survival strategy and a heavy burden. The tragedy of Rock Hudson came into full view in the 1980s. In 1985, he was diagnosed with AIDS, a disease that at the time carried immense stigma and fear. When his illness became public, Hudson became the first major celebrity to be associated with AIDS. The revelation shocked the world. For many Americans, this was the moment when the epidemic stopped being an abstract news story and became heartbreakingly real. Hudson's illness forced conversations that had long been avoided about sexuality, about disease, about compassion. His death later that year, at just 59, marked a turning point in public awareness of AIDS and ignited advocacy for research and treatment. What makes Hudson's story resonate so powerfully is that he wasn't remembered only for the gossip, the whispers, or the scandal. His legacy is far greater. On screen, he redefined what it meant to be a leading man. Romantic yet rugged, approachable yet iconic. Off-screen, his life and death reshaped Hollywood's conversation about masculinity, sex, and identity. He exposed the fragility of the carefully constructed illusions that studios once built around their stars, showing the human cost of those myths. Today, Rock Hudson is remembered as a giant, not just of film, but of cultural history. His films endure, his charm remains undeniable, but his greatest contribution may be the way his story humanized an epidemic and forced the world to confront truths it wanted to ignore. The whispers about his endowment, like so many Hollywood legends, became part of the myth. But the reality, that behind the dreamboat exterior was a man living in secrecy, longing for authenticity, was far more profound. Hudson's life and legacy remind us that Hollywood's greatest secrets often carried the deepest truths. He was more than a leading man, more than a star, more than the rumors that followed him. He was a symbol of both the power and the price of being desired, admired, and yet unseen for who he truly was. Hollywood has always been a place where myths matter as much as movies. And when it came to its leading men, the myths often reached far beyond the silver screen. Errol Flynn, Marlon Brando, Clark Gable, Milton Berle, and Rock Hudson were all giant of their time. Icons whose reputations blended skill, scandal, and sexuality into stories that audiences couldn't resist. Each man came from a different background, carved a different career, and faced different struggles, but all five carried a legend that was whispered about as much as it was watched. Flynn was a swashbuckler whose appetite for life seemed endless. Brando was the untamed beast who reinvented acting and scandalized Hollywood in equal measure. Gable stood tall as the king of Hollywood, embodying an ideal of masculinity, so potent that the rumors surrounding him only added to his royal aura. Berle turned gossip into comedy, using his reputation as one more punchline in a career built on outrageous humor. And Hudson, perhaps the most tragic of them all, lived with secrets that became part of Hollywood's greatest heartbreak and its most profound reckoning. In old Hollywood, image was everything. Studios built stars the way architects built monuments, brick by brick, headline by headline. Some images were carefully scripted, presented to the public as perfect illusions. Others were whispered in back rooms, spread in gossip columns, and carried through generations as folklore. The rumors about these men, their alleged endowments, their supposed conquests, were more than idle chatter. They became symbols of power, reminders of how masculinity was both celebrated and commodified. In an industry obsessed with appearances, even the most private details could become part of the public myth. What's striking is how these stories outlive the men themselves. The films, of course, endure. Robin Hood, On the Waterfront, Gone with the Wind, Texaco Star Theater, Giant, all remain touchstones of their eras. But alongside those artistic legacies, the whispers endure too. The legends about Flynn's escapades, Brando's voracious desires, Gable's hidden crown, Berle's notorious anecdotes, and Hudson's double life have become part of the Hollywood story, inseparable from the images we still hold of them. And perhaps that's a larger meaning. Gossip about size wasn't just about sex. It was about power, about the way masculinity was measured, mythologized, and sold to the public. It was about how Hollywood turned human beings into symbols, exaggerating every strength, every flaw, until the person disappeared and the legend took over. In the end, what people whispered about in backlots and dressing rooms said as much about Hollywood's obsessions as it did about the men themselves. These 5 stars remind us that cinema has always been about more than just scripts and screens. It has been about stories, some told in bright lights, others in hushed voices. And together, Flynn, Brando, Gable, Berle, and Hudson illustrate how a reputation, whether built or whispered, could become as lasting as a film reel. In the end, these 5 men weren't just stars. They were legends, larger than life, in more ways than one.